A man can control his words, his face, even the secrets he keeps for years, but sometimes his hands confess everything. Ethan Park had spent 3 years making sure no one in his family knew how he felt about Naomi Carter, and he nearly succeeded until a crystal glass slipped from her fingers during Sunday dinner. The sharp sound rang across the marble dining room, silencing 12 members of the Park family beneath the warm glow of the chandelier. Naomi froze beside the table, her dark hand hovering over the scattered pieces. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll clean it up." Across from her, Victoria Hahn gave a quiet, humorless laugh. 3 years in this house, and she still can't serve dinner without making a scene. Naomi lowered her eyes. She had learned long ago that dignity did not require answering every insult. At the head of the table, Ethan remained perfectly still, his charcoal suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. To everyone watching, the Korean Mafia Boss seemed untouched by the remark. Only Ethan knew how tightly his fingers had closed around his water glass. Naomi crouched to gather the pieces before another maid could reach them. "Leave it," Ethan said. His voice was calm enough to stop the room. Naomi looked up. "It's okay, Mr. Park." She reached for one last piece and flinched. A tiny edge had nicked her finger. Nothing serious. Barely more than a scratch. Yet Ethan's chair moved backward almost instantly. He crossed the room before anyone understood why he had risen. "Let me see." Naomi stared at him. "Sir, I'm fine." Ethan took her hand with a gentleness that did not belong to the man his family knew. That was the mistake. Not standing up. Not crossing the room. Not even touching her hand. It was the way he looked at her. For 3 years, Ethan had perfected indifference whenever Naomi entered a room. He could discuss business while she poured coffee beside him. He could pass her in the hallway without allowing his eyes to linger. He could hear her laugh from the kitchen and continue walking as though the sound meant nothing. But now there was no mask. His dark eyes searched her face first, then her hand, and the concern there was quiet, immediate, unmistakable. Naomi felt it too. Her breathing caught as she tried gently to pull away. "Ethan," his mother said. Grace Park had not raised her voice, yet something in it made him stop. He looked across the table. Grace was watching his hand wrapped around Naomi's. Then she looked at her son's face. She had spent 37 years learning every version of Ethan Park. The obedient son, the guarded leader, the man who revealed almost nothing he could not control. This version she had never seen. Around them, silverware remained untouched. Victoria's smile had disappeared. Naomi stood motionless beneath the chandelier, suddenly aware that every person at the table was staring at her. Ethan slowly released her hand, but it was too late. Grace understood what no one else had yet dared to name. The broken glass had revealed something her son had hidden for 3 years. And she was no longer wondering whether Ethan Park cared about the Black Maid standing beside him. She was wondering how long he had been in love with her. 3 years earlier, Naomi Carter had arrived at the Park estate carrying one suitcase, a carefully folded employment letter, and the private determination of someone who could not afford another disappointment. The house stood beyond iron gates on several quiet acres outside Chicago, all pale stone, dark wood, and tall windows reflecting the gray October sky. Naomi had cleaned expensive homes before, but this place felt different. Nothing was out of place. Nothing seemed accidental. Even the silence felt organized. Grace Park had interviewed her personally that morning, explaining the household rules with calm precision. Naomi would work 5 days a week, maintain the private rooms assigned to her, respect the family's privacy, and never interrupt meetings behind closed doors. The salary was better than anything Naomi had earned before, enough to help her mother with rent and give her younger brother a little breathing room while he finished community college. She accepted immediately. Ethan Park barely noticed her during the first several weeks. At 34, he moved through the house with the controlled distance of a man, accustomed to being obeyed without raising his voice. He left before sunrise some mornings and returned long after dinner on others. Naomi learned his habits without trying. Black coffee before 7. No sugar. The newspaper folded beside his plate. His office curtains opened exactly halfway. His desk remained untouched unless he specifically requested otherwise. Their conversations rarely exceeded 5 words. "Good morning, Mr. Park." "Morning, Naomi." That was enough. Then one rainy November night changed the rhythm between them. Naomi had stayed late because another housekeeper had called in sick. Near midnight, she was finishing the kitchen when Ethan entered through the side hallway, his coat damp from the rain and exhaustion visible beneath his usual composure. He stopped when he saw her. "You are still here?" "Finishing up." Naomi noticed the torn button on his cuff and the redness along his wrist, as though he had scraped it against something rough. She did not ask what happened. In that house, questions could become doors, and Naomi had no desire to open doors that were not hers. She simply reached into a kitchen cabinet, removed the small first aid box the staff kept there, and placed it on the counter. Ethan looked at the box, then at her. "You are not going to ask? Would you answer?" Naomi said. For the first time, something almost like amusement touched his face. "Probably not." Then we saved each other some time. She turned back toward the sink. Ethan remained there, strangely unsettled by how ordinary she had made the moment. Most people around him wanted information, approval, money, access, or protection. Naomi wanted none of it. A minute later, she placed a clean towel beside the box and headed toward the staff hallway. "Good night, Mr. Park." "Naomi." She stopped. Ethan seemed to search for words he was not accustomed to needing. "Thank you." She gave him a small smile. "Good night." Then she disappeared around the corner. Ethan stood alone beneath the warm kitchen lights, listening to the rain against the windows. He had known Naomi Carter's name for weeks. That night was the first time he wondered who she really was. After that rainy November night, Ethan Park began noticing Naomi Carter in ways he did not permit himself to examine too closely. It started with details so ordinary they should have meant nothing. She hummed quietly while arranging flowers in the breakfast room. She always left the kitchen cleaner than she found it. She called her mother every Wednesday during her lunch break and somehow sounded cheerful even on days when exhaustion rested heavily beneath her eyes. Ethan noticed all of it, then became irritated with himself for noticing. His life had been built around discipline. The Park family had expectations older than he was, rules passed from one generation to the next with the weight of inheritance. Business came before comfort. Family came before individual desire. Marriage, Grace had reminded him more than once, was not simply about affection. It was about stability, reputation, and choosing someone who understood the world surrounding their name. Ethan had accepted those principles because accepting them was easier than questioning them. Naomi did not belong anywhere inside that carefully designed future. She was an employee. She had her own life, her own family, her own dreams beyond the gates of the estate. More importantly, Ethan refused to use his position to blur a boundary she depended on for her livelihood. So he kept his distance. At least, that was what he told himself. Then small things began happening. One December morning, Naomi arrived 20 minutes late, something she had never done before. She apologized to Grace and immediately started working, but Ethan noticed her rubbing her hands together near a heating vent. Her old sedan had stopped running 2 miles from the estate, and she had walked the rest of the way through freezing wind because she could not afford to miss a shift. Ethan heard about it from another employee. By noon, he had instructed the household manager to arrange repairs through the estate's regular mechanic. "Do not tell her it came from me," he said. The manager raised an eyebrow, but wisely asked nothing. When Naomi received the call saying her repair bill had been covered under an employee assistance policy, she looked confused. "We have an employee assistance policy?" she asked Grace. Grace glanced toward Ethan, who was reading across the room. "Apparently we do now." Ethan never looked up. Weeks later, Naomi's mother became sick with the flu, and Naomi requested 2 days away. Ethan approved 5 with full pay through the household office. Again, he made certain his name stayed out of it. Naomi returned with homemade lemon pound cake for the entire staff as thanks. Ethan found one slice beside his coffee the following morning. He stared at it longer than necessary. "Naomi made it," Grace said from across the breakfast table. "I assumed that." Grace watched her son take a bite. "You do not usually eat sweets." Ethan folded his newspaper. "People change." Grace smiled faintly, but said nothing. Ethan told himself these gestures were responsibility, nothing more. A good employer repaired problems. A decent man helped when he could. Yet one evening, while passing the kitchen, he heard Naomi laughing with the other housekeepers. He stopped outside the doorway without entering. The sound was warm and unguarded, completely different from the careful voice she used around him. For several seconds, Ethan simply listened. Then he caught his reflection in the dark hallway window and understood something that unsettled him more than any family expectation ever had. He was beginning to wait for the sound of her happiness. He walked away before Naomi could see him, already knowing there were some feelings a man like Ethan Park could acknowledge only by hiding them. By the following spring, Ethan had become skilled at caring from a distance, but distance became harder to maintain when Grace Park invited Victoria Hahn to dinner. Victoria came from a prominent Korean American family in Los Angeles, carried herself with effortless confidence, and understood the expectations surrounding Ethan before anyone explained them. Grace called the evening informal. Ethan knew better. Nothing involving two powerful families was ever entirely informal. Naomi learned about the dinner that afternoon when the household manager asked her to help prepare the private dining room. She arranged white roses beneath the chandelier, polished the silverware, and placed 3 crystal glasses at each setting without asking who was coming. Then Victoria arrived in a cream-colored coat, smiling as Grace welcomed her like someone she had known for years. Naomi understood immediately. She felt something small and uncomfortable settle beneath her ribs, then reminded herself that Ethan Park's personal life had nothing to do with her. At 7:30, dinner began. Naomi served quietly while Grace and Victoria discussed art, travel, and mutual friends. Ethan remained courteous but distant. Victoria knew when to laugh, when to listen, and when to speak Korean with Grace in a way that made the older woman's face brighten. She fit the room perfectly. Naomi hated herself for noticing. When she approached Ethan with the coffee, he glanced up. "Thank you, Naomi." 2 ordinary words. Yet Victoria noticed his voice soften. "You know your staff by name?" she asked. "Of course." Ethan lifted his cup. "They are people, not furniture." Grace's eyes moved briefly toward her son. Naomi continued around the table, pretending she had not heard. Later, Victoria mentioned a charity gala in New York and suggested Ethan accompany her. Grace smiled approvingly. Ethan paused before answering. Across the room, Naomi was collecting dessert plates. Their eyes met for less than a second. Naomi looked away first. "I will check my schedule," Ethan said. It was not acceptance, but something inside Naomi still sank. That night, after the guests had gone, Ethan found her alone in the dining room replacing the flowers. "You are working late again." Naomi kept her attention on the vase. There was extra cleanup. Ethan watched her. "Is something wrong?" "No, sir." "Naomi." She finally looked at him. Her expression was composed, but he had learned enough about her to recognize when composure required effort. "Victoria seems very nice," she said. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "She is. Your mother likes her." "My mother likes many people." Naomi gave a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "Not like that." Silence settled between them. Ethan could have ended it there. He should have. Instead he asked, "Does that bother you?" Naomi's fingers stopped against the flower stem. For one dangerous moment, neither of them moved. "It is not my place to be bothered," she said quietly. Ethan felt the answer land harder than it should have. "That is not what I asked." Naomi looked directly at him now, and the careful boundary between employer and employee suddenly felt thinner than glass. "Then maybe you should not ask questions you are not prepared to answer yourself." She set the flower into the vase and walked toward the doorway. Ethan did not stop her. He could command rooms filled with people without hesitation, yet 4 quiet words from Naomi had left him without one. At the doorway, she paused but did not turn around. "Good night, Mr. Park." "Good night, Naomi." The door closed softly behind her. Ethan remained beside the table, staring at the empty chair where Victoria had been sitting, and for the first time he understood that silence was no longer protecting either of them. After that night, neither Ethan nor Naomi mentioned Victoria again, but the silence between them changed. It was no longer empty. It carried every question they refused to ask and every answer they were afraid to give. Days became months, and months quietly became years. Naomi continued moving through the Park estate with the same steady grace she had brought on her first morning, while Ethan perfected the art of pretending her presence did not matter. Yet his actions betrayed him in ways his face never did. When winter rain turned to sleet and Naomi discovered an umbrella waiting beside the staff entrance, she assumed Grace had left it there. Ethan said nothing. When her mother's prescription became unexpectedly affordable after the pharmacy corrected what it called an insurance processing error, Naomi accepted the explanation. Ethan said nothing. When her work schedule changed so she could attend her younger brother's community college graduation, she thanked the household manager. Ethan said nothing. He had learned that loving Naomi openly might complicate her life, so he chose a quieter language. He solved problems before they reached her door. He remembered what made her tired. He noticed when she needed time without forcing her to explain why. Naomi had her own language. On nights when Ethan worked past midnight, a fresh pot of coffee appeared outside his office. Always black, never sweetened. When Grace worried that Ethan was skipping meals, Naomi began leaving covered plates in the warming drawer without attaching a note. On the anniversary of his father's death, she placed a single white flower beside the framed family photograph in the library. She never told Ethan it was from her. She did not need to. He knew. 1,095 days passed that way, filled with gestures too small for anyone else to count. There were no promises. No secret meetings. No dramatic declarations. There were only two people becoming important to each other in the spaces between ordinary moments. Sometimes Ethan would hear Naomi laughing in the kitchen and slow his steps without entering. Sometimes Naomi would see his car return through the gates after a long day and feel relief before reminding herself she had no right to feel it. They lived under the same roof for hours at a time, separated by polished hallways, family expectations, and a boundary neither wanted to misuse. Ethan could have spoken. More than once, he nearly did. But Naomi depended on the job, and he refused to make her wonder whether saying no to him could cost her security. So he kept the truth where he believed it could do the least harm. Naomi misunderstood his restraint as certainty. She believed Ethan had chosen his world, and that whatever had once existed in the quiet between them had never been real enough to name. Then, near the end of their third winter, Grace Park began noticing things. It happened one morning at breakfast when Naomi entered carrying coffee. Ethan was reading a financial report and did not look up. "Good morning," Naomi said. "Morning," Ethan replied. She poured his coffee and reached automatically for the sugar bowl. Ethan finally lifted his eyes. Naomi smiled faintly and moved past it. "Right, you never take sugar." Grace watched them from across the table. Nothing unusual had happened. That was precisely what troubled her. Naomi knew Ethan's habits because she worked in his home. But Ethan watched Naomi leave the room as though he could tell from the rhythm of her footsteps whether she was having a good morning. Grace lowered her teacup. Over the next several weeks, she started counting. Ethan knew Naomi visited her mother on Wednesdays. He knew her brother had started a new job. He noticed when she changed her hairstyle. He once interrupted a conversation because Naomi coughed twice in the hallway and asked the housekeeper whether she was getting sick. Grace had spent decades watching powerful men hide ambition, resentment, fear, and disappointment. She knew what concealment looked like. One evening, she stood near the library doorway and saw Ethan open a drawer in his desk. Inside lay a simple blue scarf Naomi had misplaced during her first winter at the estate. Grace remembered Naomi searching for it years earlier. Ethan touched the folded fabric, then quietly closed the drawer. Grace stepped away before he noticed her. For 3 years, her son had hidden his feelings so carefully that even Naomi seemed unaware of their depth. But Ethan had made one mistake. He had assumed his mother would listen to what he said instead of watching what he protected. Grace Park did not confront her son after finding Naomi's blue scarf. She did something Ethan should have expected from the woman who had raised him. She watched, quietly, patiently. For the next several weeks, Grace began noticing a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. Ethan never asked where Naomi was, yet somehow he always knew. On Wednesday afternoons, when Naomi visited her mother, Ethan never scheduled household meetings that required the staff. When snow covered the driveway one January morning, he stood beside the front window until Naomi's sedan passed safely through the gates, then returned to his coffee without explanation. When Naomi arrived wearing her natural curls differently one Monday, Ethan looked at her for perhaps 2 seconds longer than usual. Grace caught it. Naomi did not. The most revealing moment came during breakfast when Naomi entered with a slight cough. "Good morning," she said, setting down the coffee. Ethan looked up. Immediately. "You sound sick." Naomi smiled. "I am fine. You said that last time you had a fever." Her hand stopped above the coffee pot. Grace slowly lowered her newspaper. Naomi seemed equally surprised. That was almost 2 years ago. Ethan realized his mistake 1 second too late. "I remember things." Apparently, Grace said. Ethan gave his mother a warning glance. She answered with an innocent sip of tea. Later that afternoon, Grace asked the household manager to bring her the employment records from Naomi's first year. There was nothing improper in them, only something curious. Car repairs authorized through a newly created employee assistance fund. Paid leave that exceeded the household policy. Medical support added shortly after Naomi's mother became ill. Each decision had been approved indirectly, routed through managers, accountants, or administrative staff. Ethan's name appeared nowhere obvious. Grace did not need to see it. She knew how her son operated. He had not been buying Naomi's affection. In fact, he had worked remarkably hard to make certain Naomi never knew the help came from him. That distinction mattered. Grace began to understand that Ethan's silence was not embarrassment. It was restraint. He was protecting Naomi from the pressure his position could place on her. Still, understanding his reasons did not mean Grace understood what would happen if the rest of the family discovered the truth. The Park family had spent generations treating marriage as something larger than two people. Expectations came wrapped in polite language: compatibility, tradition, responsibility, legacy. Grace knew exactly how quickly those words could become walls. One evening, she found Ethan alone in the library. Snow drifted beyond the windows while the fireplace cast amber light across the shelves. "How long?" Grace asked. Ethan did not look away from the document in his hands. "How long what? Do not insult me by pretending you do not understand." His eyes finally lifted. Grace walked to the desk and placed Naomi's old blue scarf between them. Ethan's expression changed so slightly another person might have missed it. Grace did not. She searched for this. Grace said, 3 winters ago." Ethan remained silent. "Why did you keep it?" "I found it after she stopped looking." "You could have returned it." "Yes, but you did not." Ethan looked toward the dark window. For once, the man who always had an answer seemed unable to find one. Grace softened her voice. "Does Naomi know?" "No, does anyone?" "No." Grace studied him for several seconds. "Then why are you telling me with your face?" Ethan almost smiled, but the expression disappeared before it formed. "I am not telling you anything." Grace picked up the scarf and placed it gently back on his desk. "You do not have to." She walked toward the door, then stopped. "Your cousin Daniel is bringing several relatives for Sunday dinner. Victoria will be here too." Ethan's shoulders tightened. "Why?" "Because families notice patterns eventually, Ethan." Grace opened the door. "And yours is becoming impossible to miss." After she left, Ethan remained alone beside the fire. Upstairs, Naomi was preparing the guest rooms, unaware that the secret Ethan had guarded for years was no longer entirely his. Sunday dinner was 3 days away. Sunday arrived beneath a pale Chicago sky, and by 6 o'clock the Park dining room had filled with relatives, polished conversation, and the quiet pressure of expectations no one needed to explain. Daniel Park sat near the center of the table with his wife, while 2 older relatives discussed business with Grace. Victoria Hahn had been seated beside Ethan, elegant in a navy dress, exactly where several members of the family seemed to believe she belonged. Naomi moved between them with practiced calm, serving dinner as though this evening were no different from hundreds before it. Ethan knew better. He could feel his mother's attention whenever Naomi came near him. Grace was not staring. Grace never needed to stare. Victoria noticed something too. When Naomi refilled Ethan's water, he moved his papers before she reached the table because he knew exactly where she preferred to place the glass. When she brought coffee, she did not ask how he took it. When another employee offered Ethan dessert, Naomi quietly said, "Mr. Park does not like anything too sweet." Daniel smiled. "You know him pretty well." Naomi gave the professional answer. "I have worked here a long time." Ethan said nothing. Then Victoria leaned back and studied Naomi with a faint smile. 3 years, is it?" "Almost exactly," Naomi replied. "That is impressive. Most household staff do not last that long around demanding families." A few people laughed politely. Naomi did not. "The Parks have always treated me fairly. Especially Ethan, apparently," Victoria said. The room changed by half a degree. Small enough to deny, large enough to feel. Ethan set down his fork. "Victoria, I meant it as a compliment." Her smile remained. Naomi reached for an empty crystal glass near Daniel's place, but another relative shifted his chair unexpectedly. The base caught the edge of the serving tray. The glass slipped. It struck the marble floor with a bright crack that silenced the table. Naomi immediately crouched. I am sorry. I will take care of it. Naomi, leave it, Ethan said. She reached for a larger piece before hearing him clearly and drew her hand back with a sharp breath. A tiny red line appeared across one finger. Ethan was standing before anyone else moved. Let me see. It is barely a scratch. Naomi. His voice had changed. The authority was still there, but something warmer had broken through it. He took her hand carefully and examined the small cut. Naomi stared at him, startled less by the gesture than by the concern in his eyes. Around them, conversation had vanished. Victoria's expression hardened. Daniel looked from Ethan to Naomi and then toward Grace. One older relative whispered something under his breath. Ethan heard it. What did you say? The man hesitated. I said this seems like a great deal of concern over a maid cutting her finger. Naomi immediately pulled her hand away. Please. I am fine. Ethan turned toward the table. Her name is Naomi. The relative blinked. I know her name. Then use it. Silence. Naomi felt every pair of eyes shift toward her. She wanted to disappear into the staff hallway, but Grace spoke before she could move. Ethan. He looked at his mother. Grace's face held no anger, only certainty. How long? Daniel frowned. How long what? Grace never looked away from her son. Ethan understood. So did Victoria. Naomi did not. Not yet. Mother, Ethan said quietly. She deserves to know before this family turns her into a subject of conversation. Naomi's heartbeat quickened. Know what? Ethan looked at her. 3 years of restraint, hidden kindness, unfinished sentences, and carefully maintained distance seemed to gather in the space between them. Grace asked again, softer this time. How long have you loved her? Naomi stopped breathing. Victoria went perfectly still. Ethan could have denied it. He could have protected the secret one more night. Instead, he looked directly into Naomi's eyes. 3 years. The room went silent. For several seconds, Naomi heard nothing except the faint hum of the chandelier above them. 3 years. The words seemed impossible, yet suddenly 100 forgotten moments returned with different meanings. The repaired car. The unexpected paid leave. The schedule changes. The umbrella waiting beside the staff entrance. The way Ethan always seemed to know when her mother was sick or when her brother had something important happening. Naomi looked at him as if seeing a familiar room with all the lights turned on for the first time. 3 years, she whispered. Ethan did not look away. Yes. Victoria slowly pushed back her chair. Daniel lowered his eyes, while one of the older relatives stared at Ethan in disbelief. This is inappropriate, the man said. She works for this family. Ethan's expression cooled. That does not make her less worthy of respect. That is not what I meant. Then choose your words more carefully. Naomi felt heat rise into her face. She did not want Ethan defending her while 12 people studied her as though she had become evidence in a family dispute. Please stop, she said. Ethan turned immediately. Naomi. Not here. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. Not like this. She left the dining room before anyone could answer. Ethan started after her, then stopped when Grace touched his arm. Give her a moment. Upstairs, Naomi entered her small staff room and closed the door. Her suitcase rested on the top shelf of the closet, the same one she had carried into the estate years earlier. She pulled it down. Her hands shook as she folded clothes into it. She loved him. That truth no longer frightened her nearly as much as the truth surrounding it. Ethan's family had expectations. Ethan had responsibilities. Naomi had spent her entire life protecting the dignity of choices that belonged to her. She would not remain in a house where every kindness could now be questioned and every glance interpreted as ambition. 20 minutes later, she carried the suitcase downstairs. Ethan was waiting near the front hall. His face changed when he saw it. What are you doing? Leaving. You do not have to. I know. That answer stopped him. Naomi placed her house key on the entry table. That is why I have to make the decision myself. Ethan stepped closer, then deliberately stopped several feet away. Did I make you uncomfortable? No. Did I ever make you feel that your job depended on how you felt about me? Never. Then why leave? Naomi swallowed. Because now everyone knows, and tomorrow every cup of coffee I bring you becomes a story. Every favor becomes proof that I wanted something. Every mistake becomes a reason someone can say, I do not belong here. Ethan's jaw tightened. I can handle my family. I know you can. But I do not want you to handle me. The words landed between them. Ethan's expression softened. I would never try. Naomi's eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. Then let me go. Every instinct Ethan possessed told him to fix the problem. Make a call. Change an arrangement. Use the authority that had solved almost every obstacle in his adult life. But Naomi was not an obstacle, and love was not permission to control someone. Slowly, he stepped aside from the doorway. Naomi looked surprised. You are not going to stop me? You asked me not to. Her face tightened with emotion. Ethan opened the front door. Cold Chicago air moved into the marble foyer. Naomi walked past him, then paused on the steps. For what it is worth, she said without turning, you were not the only one hiding something. Ethan froze. Naomi continued toward her car before he could answer. He stood beneath the porch light as she drove through the gates and disappeared into the winter night. For the first time in years, Ethan Park had done absolutely nothing to stop the woman he loved from leaving, because respecting her choice mattered more than satisfying his own heart. Then he went upstairs, removed his coat, opened the desk drawer, and looked at the blue scarf he had kept for 3 winters. By morning, Ethan knew what he had to do. He would not send a driver. He would not send an employee. He would not ask anyone to speak for him. This time, if he wanted Naomi to hear the truth, he would have to walk into her world without bringing his power with him. By 9 the next morning, Naomi was sitting beside the front window of her mother's modest brick house on the south side, watching fresh snow soften the sidewalks, when a dark sedan stopped at the curb. She expected a driver to step out. Instead, Ethan Park emerged alone. No assistant. No family representative. No carefully arranged message delivered through someone else. Just Ethan in a charcoal overcoat, holding a familiar blue scarf in one hand. Naomi opened the door before he could knock. You kept that. Ethan looked down at the scarf. For longer than I should have. She almost smiled, but the weight of the previous night remained between them. Why are you here? Because you were right. Ethan's answer came without hesitation. I spent 3 years deciding what was best for you without ever asking what you wanted. Naomi folded her arms against the cold. You were trying to protect me. Protection without honesty can still become a wall. That silenced her. Ethan stepped no closer. I need you to understand something. I never hid how I felt because I was ashamed of you. I hid it because you worked in my home, because my name carries expectations you never asked to carry, and because I never wanted you wondering whether saying no to me would cost you your job. Naomi's eyes softened. Ethan. It was the first time she had said his name without the distance of Mr. Park between them. He heard the difference. I thought silence was the respectful choice, he continued. Maybe it was, at first. Then it became fear. Fear of what? That my world would take something good and turn it into another obligation. Naomi looked toward the quiet street. Your family already thinks I do not belong. Some of them do. Ethan did not soften the truth. But I am finished allowing their expectations to make my decisions. Naomi studied him. And if I say I am not coming back, then you do not come back. If I find another job, I wish you well. If I tell you that what I said last night does not mean I am ready for any of this. Ethan nodded. Then I wait without asking you to promise me anything. Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but this time she smiled. You really came all this way just to give me choices? Ethan held out the scarf. I should have given this back 3 years ago. I am trying to correct one mistake at a time. She took it from him, their hands touching only briefly. A second car stopped behind Ethan's. Grace stepped out. Naomi's smile vanished. Ethan turned, surprised. His mother approached slowly. I owe Naomi an apology, Grace said. Not for asking the question last night, but for allowing a family dinner to become a place where her dignity was discussed as though she were not standing there. Naomi said nothing. Grace met her eyes. You do not need my permission to matter to my son, and you certainly do not need my permission to matter as a person. Ethan watched his mother with quiet surprise. Grace looked at him next. Tradition can teach us where we came from. It should not decide who deserves our respect. Naomi wrapped the blue scarf around her neck. She did not return to the estate that morning. She did not become Ethan's employee again. Instead, she accepted a position managing a small hospitality company several weeks later, building a life that belonged entirely to her. Ethan visited when she invited him. He called instead of sending messages through others. They learned each other outside the walls that had once defined them. Months later, at another Park family dinner, Naomi entered through the front door as Ethan's guest. Every eye turned toward them. Ethan did not hesitate. He reached for her hand, and Naomi chose to take it. Grace smiled from across the room. No one spoke. No one needed to. For 3 years, Ethan had believed love meant protecting Naomi from his world. In the end, she taught him something harder. Real love protects dignity first, even when that means giving someone the freedom to walk away. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.